Hello and welcome to another Book Talk with Tracy. I am here today going to be reading from my book Conspiracy of Bones, originally called And the Beat Goes On. I want to read both the prologue and chapter 1, so I will be dividing this segment into two parts, simply because the prologue is set in very ancient times, and then of course the story itself takes place in current times. So, today I will be reading from the prologue. Tom-tom, tom-tom, pulsing, throbbing, the earth reverberated. Dancers leapt to the ancient rhythm, their half-naked bodies glistening with sweat in the firelight, twisted and arched as the primal beat called to the pulse within. Overhead, the display case of heaven sparkled, the diamonds large and brilliant against their black velvet nest. Accompanying this was a symphony of sound, a full choir of heavenly voices carried on the solar winds through the crystalline canopy of heaven to the sons of earth below. The heavy scent of giant orchids, which bloomed along the outer perimeter of the temple gardens, mingled with the spices and perfumes that were thrown into the fire by the priestess. High above the ornate altar around which the dancers poured their carnal worship, a handsome young would-be king watched from his seat of honor. His heartbeat quickened, for he knew what was coming next. He had witnessed the ancient ritual as a child when his own father had been crowned king, had become a god. Abruptly, the drum ceased. A hush swept through the crowd of onlookers who circled the stone platform. The dancers scattered. From out of the shadows marched 12 beasts. They were human in appearance, except for the gigantic wings, leathery like those of a bat, which were folded across their backs and whose tips nearly touched the ground. Each man was tall and well-muscled, the finest and bravest in the kingdom. They were the king's guard, especially chosen and groomed from boyhood, a privilege for only the strongest and bravest. They would accompany the king wherever he went, even to the grave. As descendants of the Nephilim, the race of giants born from the union of the gods and mortal women, they feared nothing, not even death. The guards lined up on the large platform facing the king as the chief among them solemnly ascended the flight of stone steps that led from the altar to the king's throne. From here he had a good view of every spectacle. The guards saluted, turned, and gave the signal to the others. With precision, the guards stepped back to form a corridor. The heretofore silent crowd could not help but murmur. A wave rippled through the masses as 6 burly slaves led the captive forward, shackled, hobbled, and muzzled. Even then it was a struggle to get the huge beast prostrate upon the altar of sacrifice. Its beady eyes glistened as its leather wings twitched. A priest came forward, gilded knife held high over the creature's heart. A slave released the muzzle that had kept the creature silent, and the knife plunged directly into the heart of the animal as a piercing scream echoed through the forest, seeming to rebound from the canopy of the brilliant sky. Other skilled workers moved quickly into place, and with a few precise cuts, the huge leather wings were removed. Next, the head was severed, the brains neatly extracted, leaving only the long, pointed beak, majestic red crest, and beady eyes intact. Blood dripped from the newly hewn crown as it was placed reverently in the hands of the chief guard. With dignified solemnity, he carried the grisly trophy up the long stairway to the king. The priest followed closely on his heels. The prized headpiece was placed on the king's head, even as blood continued to drip from its depths onto his hair and beard. The priest, who had brought with him a goblet of the animal's blood, rendered from its jugular vein, presented it to the sovereign. He whispered the ancient words of the deity into the king's bloody ear, an incantation not meant for mortals. Slowly the new sovereign raised the goblet to his lips. Without wavering, he took a swallow from the cup, letting the blood trickle from the corners of his mouth. Lowering the goblet, his handsome face was suddenly spoiled by a malicious grin. The priest stepped back as 4 others came bearing the wings, still attached as one piece by the skin of the creature's back. They were strong men, but even they let out a grunt as the heavy cape was settled onto the shoulders of the monarch. He thought for a moment he would not be able to bear the weight of it. Once the wings were properly cleaned and tanned, they would weigh much less, and he would be expected to wear them for all public ceremonies. But for this night, he must bear the full weight of the mantle, blood and all. The blood, which the priest had mixed with some special herbs, was giving him new strength, however, and the words, those secret words passed down from the outer world of his ancestors, words which no human could hear, they also gave him power. He was one of them now, a god among men. He straightened majestically in his seat, as if the weight on his shoulders was nothing more than an ordinary cloak. He smiled a bloody smile, flashes of white peeking through the glistening red, and raised his hand in salute. A cheer went up from the crowd. The heartbeat of the tom-tom was revived. People rushed forward to clap and dance around the flaming torches that skirted the perimeter of the platform as the dancers resumed their gyrations around the altar of incense. The tempo increased, as did the frenzied dancing. Some of the spectators began screaming and wailing. Others tore at their clothing. Just when it seemed the festivities were about to turn into a full-fledged orgy, a trumpeting signal brought the writhing crowd to a standstill. The guards remained steadily at their posts, circling the outer edge of the platform. The tom-tom took up another beat, this time methodical and solemn, as a priestess, waving a fragrant branch of flowers before her, led a procession from the darkness of the forest into the light of the torches, and then up into the center of the platform. With her were 24 maidens, all beautiful in their delicately fluttering garments, all virgins, never having set sight on a member of the male gender before this moment. They had been raised for this purpose, innocent, yet knowing that their lives held great significance. Now was the time of fulfillment. The air was heavy with perspiration and heat, laced with tension and anticipation. The priestess finished her brief words of blessing. One word from the king now was all it would take. With relish, the newly crowned king surveyed the virgins, beautiful, innocent, and ripe, every one. His own lustful desires rose up, and he grinned widely. He would have his pick at a later time in the privacy of his own chambers. Suddenly, a flashing sheet of light swept across the sky to the east, followed by a deep rumbling, much like the mighty cascading noise of a waterfall. The crowd gasped in fear. Perhaps it was a sign of approval from the gods, he thought. He hoped. Somewhere deep within he heard another voice. His father had told him once about a man, a lunatic, who had been building a boat from before his grandfather's time. He was a self-proclaimed prophet and said that the earth was to be destroyed by a flood. It seemed ridiculous then, and even more so now. The crazy man had been giving his warning for hundreds of years, and nothing had happened yet. Besides, he was a god now himself. He was absolute ruler, at least in this part of the world. His own ancestors had left the area where the lunatic lived long ago, partly in search of treasure, partly to get away from his teaching. They had settled far away in a prosperous and fertile land, and here they had been met by the gods. As if in answer to his thoughts, another amazing spectacle lit the sky. This time it was a giant forked bolt of light, followed by an even louder crash. The people gasped again. Someone even screamed. He must take control. With a lion-like roar, the king lifted his arm, giving the signal. "The gods are pleased! Let the ceremony commence!" The guards, who had previously been standing at attention around the perimeter of the platform, suddenly jumped into action. Without any delicacy or ceremony, they charged at the group of maidens. Grabbing their chosen prey and proceeding to rape them with violence and brutality right before the gaping crowd of onlookers. The mob cheered on encouragement as the fetid orgy continued before their eyes on the platform. Potential escapees were thrown back into the arena for more, as each man exercised his rights to the full. Before long, many onlookers joined in the debauchery, some willingly, others not. It did not matter. This was one night when anything and everything was acceptable. The king looked on in sadistic pleasure, hungry lust burning within his own loins. But gods had control over their desires. He must remember that. His time would come later. Another sheet of lightning crashed along the horizon, illuminating the spectacle below. This was followed by a forked bolt, spectacular in its intensity and brilliance. Some of the people started to scatter in fear. Others seemed to be spurred on. The king ignored the uncertainties in his own heart. With another roar, he stood with outstretched arms and shouted his approval. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Genesis 6, 12 and 13. And that ends the prologue to And the Beat Goes On, Conspiracy of Bones. I'm going to continue reading from the book. Chapter 1 is next, of course, and that is where we switch time to contemporary setting. So stay tuned for next time with Book Talk with Tracy. If you're interested, you can head over to my website, tracykrauss.com, knowing Tracy, 2 S's in Krauss, and check out this book or my many other books and plays. Until next time, we will see you then, and God bless.